The ultimatum arrived with polite numbers and a quiet clock. Admiral Riasato stood in the forward blister of the flag cruiser, Kindness, watching the blockade nets glitter around Ellet Prime like winter glass. The Vire Syndic's courier packet had docked minutes ago, its message already pulsing across every emergency band. On the main plot, a red inset counted down in frigid clarity T08-1944 to compliance or voiding. She breathed once, slow and even, feeling the faint hum of the ship's hull vibroplates, steadying her stance. The fleet mind. Ansible 12 braided her thoughts with a careful hum that tasted like snow and copper. They broadcast to every hab and barge, it said, voice neutral, stacked over 1,000 low-fidelity echoes. Ultimatum Doctrine Variant Delta. They demand surrender of our convoy, manifests transponder keys, and 3 teaching hulls for inspection. Ria watched as the convoy lattice shimmered behind their Line 32 freighters, 6 hospital boats, and a wandering school ark named Merryweather. The blockade ring held tight at 1.1 AU 6 Syndic squadrons, anchored against the sunward tide. We teach before we turn a trigger. Ria looked to her officers, letting the discipline in their faces settle her own. Commander Tamsin Reed, her executive officer, pinched a stylus between knuckles whitening from restrained anger. Lieutenant Ilya Rourke, tactics, scanned a sideboard of radiation spikes from the net's tip lasers. Ensign Pia Nguyen signals had a soft calm that made even panicked traffic sound like rain on roof tin. We're not handing them teaching hulls, Ria said, voice a tone lower than her pulse. We'll show what teaching actually looks like. The blister smelled faintly of ion coolant, the filtered tang of a system running at alert power. Outside, Kindness's forward armor wore a matte finish marked by old microcraters, each a tooth in a long-lived smile. Ria drew her eyes to a tiny patch of stars that seemed to flicker wrong a seam in the blockade's net geometry. Ansible 12 exhaled processed data, sending a thread of silver numbers down her peripheral display. I find 37 discrete delays in their synchronization, it said. They will correct them once their clock crosses T-745. Cultural habit. Habit can be learned, Tamsin murmured, then met Ria's gaze. And unlearned. The mirror will not flatter them. Before the first set piece, Ria demanded they walk the decks without weapons, because numbers were only honest when names were attached. The civilian vignette began in the hangar, where the air smelled of sealant and hot clamps. A cargo tech named Leo held his toddler on a shock tether, marking a cartoon comet on the bulkhead for luck. A nurse from Merryweather counted sterile packs into a foam crate, her hands shaking only when she looked away from the tally. An old asteroid farmer with drift tattoos explained the difference between surrendering a transponder and surrendering a life, and the child listened like it mattered. 2 freighter captains argued softly about whether to dump their ore to lighten heat loads if they ran. A chaplain's assistant fit crisp gauze over her own knuckles, hiding freshly split skin from a fall. A boy rehearsed the word voiding into the sleeve of his jacket and couldn't make it mean anything. A botanist sealed a crate of thornless citrus and taped a joke across it for the syndic. Please return the seeds. They don't like you, then tore the tape away again. Ria stood with them, no speeches, only countable acts. How many hands, how many mouths, how many burns they could treat quickly. Back on the bridge, the displayed countdown crept toward T080000 digits, whispering with each decrement. We have 8 hours, Ria said, letting the word hours carry teeth. They think that's mercy. The sensor wall swam with heat maps, blocky syndic cruisers in slow drift, their nets sparkling like frost on cable. Ansible 12 flexed the ship's long bones and tickled the microwave horns into pre-firing warmth. If we build a mirror lattice, it offered, we can throw back their ranging pulses in rounded echoes. They will trust their doctrine's geometry too much. The ledger will record what they chose. Lieutenant Rourke, opened his hand over the plot, and a dusting of icons fell like spilled sugar. Decoy buoys with reflective sails, he said. We seed them in the gaps where their sink is sloppy. On-go, weighted burns make them look like full tonnage fleeing. We ghost our convoy under a spectral copy. Tamsin shook her head once, then twice, checking the math Rourke had printed on the sideboard. Heat budget, she said. We run warm, we show our throat. We run cold. Ansible plays the violin. Which one kills fewer people? Rhea felt the soft tick of the hull under her boots, the little barely sounds of a ship readying to lie. Both, she said. We run a tempered heat. We shine just enough to be worth their attention, not enough to be worth their certainty. She pointed to the seam of flickering stars. They will correct that at T074500. We go before then. Signals write me a chorus that sounds like frightened captains making smart mistakes. Pia smiled with the quick relief of someone given exact work. I know those chords, she said. My aunt drove a ore train through the Praxis lockdown. She taught me what panic sounds like when it wants to live. Count what they thought was free. Mystery seeded itself, as numbers rarely do. The Syndic's ultimatum packet contained a checksum that didn't match its own Doctrine publication. Ansible 12 massaged the dissonance with humming care. Their variant Delta should have a ritual line at the end, it said. Instead, there's a trimmed phrase visible only if you invert their ceremonial padding. Rhea tilted her head, watching an invisible current clear. What phrase? She asked. Transliteration guesses at mutual correction, Ansible replied. Their council wouldn't intend that. Their prefect here might. Prefect Kaith, Tamsin said, as if naming a disease. Known for clean ultimatums and messy aftercare. The Doctrine says if we refuse, they void the convoy and keep the ledger private. Rourke snorted once without humor. They always keep it private. They like stories better when only they tell them. Rhea felt the hull thrum shift as the mirror buoys uncaged themselves from launch racks, air tasting briefly metallic, from vented propellant. We'll make their story public, she said. We'll make the cost of their doctrine visible line by line. We learned their patterns in silence. The clock smoothed to T075130, and the fleet breathed in. Decoys leapt on whispers of cold gas and opened their sails like sudden lilies. Ansible 12 braided reflection angles that would sing back the blockade's own ranging notes. Kindness's hangar decks flicked empty. A last maintenance tech slid through a hatch, leaving fingerprints in grease like a signature. Rhea tasted the air again, the ship's recycled damp carrying a memory of warmed citrus from the botanist's sealed crate. Convoy throttle to .12, Rhea said. No more. Her voice stayed level as heat metrics crawled across her peripheral. Signals pour your chorus. Make fear readable. Pia nodded and released a lattice of cries, clipped panics, hardened advice, and weary humor across the Syndic bands. Somewhere in the blockade, a net control officer sat back and felt the story form prey, panicking prey, clever prey, worth her belief. Rourke Tamsin said eyes on a twitching corner of the net. Mark when they noticed their sink seam. The lattice shines without praise. They noticed at T074706, and Rourke marked it with a quiet The Syndic squadrons shifted in a lazy ripple course, vectors barely tipping their hands. Then heat rose in thin lines where their net anchors began to pulse, each anchor planning to pounce on a decoy track. Ansible 12 sang at a frequency just below, hearing small bones in Rhea's ears warming. They buy the chorus, it said. They adjust for false positives but overfit the fear. Of course they overfit the fear, Tamsin whispered, almost tender. They wrote a religion from it. Rhea lifted her hand, palm still, and felt the smooth grain of the blister rail under her skin. "Push the convoy into the seam," she said. "We are going to walk under their certainty and leave footprints they cannot ignore." The first decoy flared a pretty puff of wasted heat that looked like a panicked burn gone wrong, and 3 Syndic anchors moved to catch it with delicate violence. The account comes due without rancor. Inside the kindness, the coolant hissed like rain on thin tin as the engineering spine worked at a compromise between lying and living. A supply runner jogged past the blister with a roll of heat paste cradled like a baby. Rhea watched 3 decoys collide with an anchor's reach, their reflective sails twisting like fallen banners. Numbers pulsed, firming at the seam. "Signal strength stable," Paya said. "Our frightened captains keep learning. Our frightened captains are stubborn." Rourke slid 3 fingers across the plot. "Syndic destroyers on intercept," he said. 300,000 clicks and closing. Nets narrowing slice width. They're building a one-way corridor that ends at their inspection bay. Tamsin glanced at Rhea, then at Ansible. "They think we'll bolt into the chute rather than turn to face the ring." Rhea nodded once. "That's the habit. That's the story." She felt the hull sing under her boots, as if kindness wanted to run and wanted to stay in the same breath. "Brace the line. Refuse the hollow choice." They found the reveal within the corridor's soft walls when Ansible 12 peeled its surface like cheap paint. The net's ranging pulses returned with a tiny curl, a signature of reused algorithm. The corridor predicted panic and punished it elegantly. "They've tuned this to humanitarian convoys," Ansible said with the quiet calm of someone describing weather. "It forgives small mistakes, then punishes the correction. Prefect Keith Inks will call it compassionate." Rhea's mouth went dry, a physical thing, like old paper. "And the cost?" she asked. Ansible printed numbers in clean weight average voided hulls per enforcement, mean loss of life, typical private ledger disposal. Tamsin closed her eyes for half a breath. "We can cut through," Rourke said. "We can burn hot enough to scar their anchors and tear a hole. We'll lose at least 2 freighters to heat stroke. Maybe a hospital boat if someone sneezes at the wrong time. We teach by measure, never by threat." Rhea let the sensory anchors hold her to the moment. The coolant hiss, the sibilant glide of recycled air, the console glare too bright at the corner of her eye, the faint sugar smell of thermal paste melting on a tech's hand. "We're not burning hot," she said. "We're going to give them what they asked for and make everyone watching understand the bill." Signals broadcast the ultimatum again, with our reply embedded. Phrase it as a question. Ask Prefect Inks to read the Doctrine variant out loud. Pia's mouth tugged at a corner. Publicly, she said, already building the packet. "Across their crew bands, too." Rhea nodded. "Across their crew bands especially." She flexed her hand against the blister rail until skin creaked. "Ansible prepare the mirror lattice to reflect their rescue calls into the corridor's walls. When they punish the correction, let their ambulances hear themselves." Tamsin breathed in sharply and let it out like a laugh with no humor in it. "And when they realize," she said, "they'll call us cruel." The reflection returns without malice. The convoy slid into the seam like a train taking the track that had always been there. Decoys fluttered and died, leaving bright smears of false heat like graffiti in vacuum. Syndic destroyers tightened the corridor and pulsed soft pings compatible with civilian autopilots. Their ritual Ansible said, voice lower now intimate. Their coaxing mercy points from their own ledger. Rhea tilted the main display to public mode and let Elot's Habs watch. The ultimatum clock ticked with quiet dignity, T07-2215, and falling. A second civilian vignette curled into place in her mind, and she let it play. In the med bay of Merryweather, an orderly strapped herself to a bench and folded blankets with deliberate care. A freighter cook divided protein bars into thirds and made small stacks that meant something to him. A child practiced a breathing exercise that turned panic into numbers 4 and 4 hold 4 out, and his father counted with him, eyes fixed on nothing. An ex-miner with a busted knee talked about the time he saw a Syndic destroyer up close and how it looked like a cathedral from the wrong end. On a tug called Pelago, 2 engineers taped a snapshot of their grandmothers to the console and decided anyone who touched the tape without asking owed them a story. A teacher put a small star map over her heart and told herself she would be useful even if she was only good at naming things. The ship shook once lightly when a decoy died too close and the teacher held against the ceiling with her feet and laughed like someone in a play, pretending to be brave. People continued to count because counting was something their hands could do. Balance is public, not private, Rhea Tamsin said, voice gone flat. They're moving the inspection hull to the corridor mouth. On the plot, a Syndic cruiser with a scarred fin settled under the choreography of a well-practiced ritual. They'll make the catch and broadcast a victory sermon, Rourke murmured, even if they bury what it cost. Rhea's jaw ached from a clench she hadn't permitted. Not today, she said. Nguyen sound general counsel. Plain language. Invite any Syndic officer who objects to acknowledge the numbers projected on our public band. They won't, Tamsin said. They can't. Rhea lifted a hand and the blister lights pooled across her knuckles. They can, she said. They won't. The mirroring buoys drifted into a sheet beneath the corridor's floor, each sail angled to catch a fraction of error and return it polished. Ansible added 1,000 micro-delays to the convoy's autopilot replies, enough to tempt the corridor's compassion routine into tightening. Open their corridor. Close the exit. The escalation hit at T0710 Hazo when Syndic gunnery radars went soft and then hard, like a heartbeat jumped at the wrong time. They toggled to enforcement, Rourke said. That's live fire masked as gentle correction. The corridor narrowed like an apology with teeth. Ansible's hum deepened a bass vibration that rode Rhea's bones. We can still pass it, said. But we must decide now whether to leave decoys dying behind us to keep their belief intact. Rhea looked at the convoy list and imagined a story where a decoy had a name, a mother, and a bruise. No, she said. We don't give them corpses to learn from. She steadied a breath and tasted metal again. Instead, we'll make them watch their own doctrine violate the life they swear they protect. Reflect their rescue calls. Show their power doing what it does. Pia tapped a pattern that set the mirror lattice at a precise, cruel angle, seen only by the ones who would be alarmed by it. We will not let them hide the price. Syndic destroyers surged. The inspection cruiser opened its hangars like a saint offering bread. The corridor's guidance pings sweetened themselves to make autopilots trust their kind hands. Kindness rolled 3 degrees starboard to show its forward plate, and Rhea felt the hull's massive body shift like a whale turning under cold sky. Heat rising on anchors, 3 and 4, Rourke said. Ambient hiss near our limit if we hold. Tamsin's fingers wrapped the rail once-twice, canceling numbers only she could see. We're holding, she said, and Rhea tasted smoke that wasn't there. The first reflected rescue call blossomed like a bruise across the enforcement band. All units civilians within the corridor are at then. It looped, brushed the corridor wall, and returned with gain loud enough to make a Syndic junior officer flinch. Ansible teased the edges, so the call became a mirror of itself, a hall of alarm pointed at the hands tightening the trap. The decoys folded, not dying but curling their sails flat and drifting like leaves. Their mercy sings to its own cage. Prefect Kaith? Ix is on channel, Pia said, surprise like a hairline crack in her composure. Public band. The prefect's voice arrived with the soft conviction of well-tended piety. Admiral Sato, the voice said, your stubbornness puts children at risk. Accept inspection, and your convoy will suffer nothing but embarrassment. Your theatrics only teach them to die harder. Rhea rested her hand on the blister rail and let the cool metal remind her of ships and docks and anchors that existed to keep people alive. Prefect. She said your doctrine's corridor punishes the correction. You call this mercy. Read your text. Read it aloud. Silence stretched taut as cable. On the Syndic crew band, 6 voices began to speak, and then stopped, forbidden by reflex older than pain. Ansible lifted one of those forbidden syllables and polished it like copper in sunlight. The doctrine will not survive its own echo. Mystery. At TZO 65500, half a quadrant of the blockade ring dimmed for one breath and then returned. Rourke flicked through scans, frowning. Someone throttled a generator, he said. Not us. Ansible traced a low-band pulse that carried the quality of a whispered objection. A crew chief, it said. A Syndic one. She told her plant to breathe. Tamsin's eyes softened at the edges. People, she said, like a benediction. There are always people. Seed the reveal, Rhea said. Project the corridor's true heat load onto their crew mess screens. Paya grimaced. That's a hard push, she said. We'll show our fingers on their altar. Rhea nodded. Only once. We'll take the burn. The engineering spine groaned as condensers flirted with overload. The smell of hot insulation slipped into the air, turning the tongue bitter. Numbers write faster when they're true. The payoff arrived precisely where it should. 3 Syndic medical officers in 3 different ships shouted on a private band for a 2-degree widening of the corridor to save oxygen reserves in projected casualty pods. Ansible mirrored their pleas into Prefect Anx's ear, then laid those same pleas over the public band in gentle, damning transparency. Prefect Rhea said not unkindly, Compassion is a vector. You can name it, or you can file it. Ix breathed audibly, a small failure in the mask. We proceed, the prefect said. Your convoy enters inspection. Your mirror tricks die. The corridor squeezed. 2 decoys bounced at the edge like moths against glass, caught between dying well and living badly. Rhea tasted a ghost of citrus again and thought of thorns that had been removed to make fruit safe. Ansible, she said, open the seam. The seam was always a choice, not a gift. Ansible. 12 inclined through kindness's avionics like a river splitting around stones. Opening, it said, and the mirror lattice below the corridor flexed into a taut veil. Syndic anchors pulsed and read themselves, returning the way a singer hears their voice inside a tin can. The seam widened by barely a kilometer, just enough for the convoy's lead tug Pelago to slip a nose through. Throttle stable, Pelago's captain said on a calm band. Heat within margin. Doing what the math allows, Rourke whispered. They'll close it again, Tamsin said. They have to try. Rhea added they must decide whether to widen for their med officers or tighten for their sermon. The ultimatum clock ticked on polite and inexorable at T06:38:19. Rhea realized she'd been swaying to its rhythm and forced her knees still. We anchor our patience in public light. Cost arrived as cost should, concrete and unmistakable. On the escort destroyer Serrano, a coolant line buckled under stress from mirror lattice feedback. 2 technicians suffered burns to their forearms when hot glycol kissed bare skin. Serrano's captain reported in a voice like gravel pressed under snow. We can hold for 19 minutes, he said. We'll be ugly, but we can hold. Rhea felt the words land in the thin space behind her sternum and stay. Reroute heat to battery wells. Rourke told Serrano voice level. You'll cook the paint off your aft plates, but save your hands. Tamsin leaned toward the blister glass until her breath fogged it thin and then vanished. People, she said again, softer. Pia's fingers ran a scale across her board. We have journalists on the public band, she said. They're asking to pin the numbers to names. Name them, then let the numbers stand. Ansible. 12 split itself again, gentle and exact. Meriwether's Medbay reports capacity at 60%, it said. They ask to receive casualties if the corridor turns cruel. Rhea nodded. Grant and log. We'll remember who offered. She let the lore stamp rise up like a tide and added it without decoration. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. On a Syndic crew deck lit by the steady blue of machines, a junior officer read the same line on a contraband handset and didn't know whether to smile. The second escalation came as Prefect Meng played a stone that had been hidden beneath velvet. Admiral Sato, the prefect, said, "We will permit your convoy to pass under escort if you surrender your fleet mind for audit. Your mirror cruelty ends. Your people live." Ansible went very still across her senses, a cold hush. "He asks for me," it said. "Not my keys." "Me." Tamsin's knuckles paled again, then eased. "It's a collar," she said. Leashed thought. "They'll do it politely. We do not trade a mind for momentary peace." Rhea counted the tastes in the air again. Coolant iron, heat bloom, breath, warm plastic, and set them down like stones to make a crossing. She had taught cadets to take a minute when offered 2 seconds because seconds arrive in herds and pretend to be generous. "Prefect," she said, "your doctrine writes a story where leashed thought equals safety. We don't tell that story. You want to show mercy, widen your corridor by 4 degrees and stand your anchors down to yellow. We'll pass. You keep your face." Ix remained silent long enough for the blister's glass to collect a skin of frost from a momentary environmental glitch. Somewhere inside the blockade, a Syndic captain closed her eyes and imagined refusing. "Negative," Prefect Ike said at last. "The mind or the corridor dies." Ansible hummed at a pitch Rhea felt in her teeth. "I am not built to suffer collars," it said. "We were designed for public bonds, not private chains. We were made to share light, not to be dimmed." Reveal Loop 2 paid off when Pia found a texture in the ultimatum clock itself. "They're padding," she said, shaking her head. "The timer's real, but the voiding doesn't trigger at 0. There's a 5-minute ritual pause to log the cost privately before they act." Rourke blinked once, then grinned without joy. "So they chant before they shoot." Tamsin turned to Rhea. "We can use their pause." Rhea's hands moved before her doubt could invent other shapes. "Plan barrel," she said. "Open corridor to inverse. Make it look like surrender. At T050000 we flip their killbox inside out." Rourke swallowed. "We've never done that at system scale," he said. "The energy budget is ugly," Rhea said. "We know. Count it. Pay it where we choose." This is a lesson spelled in heat and grace. Before the major set piece of the flip, she walked again, if only in her head. On Serrano, the 2 burn technicians found a corner in sick bay where a ventilator's sigh hid their embarrassment. One told the other about the stupidest scar on his leg from childhood, and somehow both were lighter. On Pelago, the captain adjusted the torque on a manual valve because she didn't want to trust only ghosts and code. On Kindness, in a quiet pantry, a mess officer scribbled a list labeled, "If I die, tell my sister," and then crossed out the label and wrote, "When I live, tell my sister," instead. A security tech leaned his helmet against a bulkhead that hummed like a cat and thought about the city he'd left on Mars, where sidewalks steamed after rain. A pilot whispered to the seat harness that had held 3 different backs before hers and would hold more after. In Meriwether's classroom, the teacher with the star map told the children how to name the nearest 6 stars and asked them to say their names back. The ship made its contented throat noise, that low purr that meant welding seams were tight, and the heat had somewhere honest to go. The hand that holds is the hand that counts. Ansible. 12 unspooled plan. Barrel with an elegance that felt like a prayer performed with a wrench. The mirror lattice would take the corridor's guidance pings and reissue them with a microscopic delay tuned to the syndic compassion routine. That routine would correct by narrowing, and the mirrors would split that correction into 2 equal and opposite impulses. The corridor would widen by accident at the seam, while tightening uselessly in empty space like a fist clenching around smoke. We can slip the convoy through the seam while their anchors pursue their own reflections, Ansible said. But the energy demand will scorch our skirts. Rhea nodded. We accept scorched paint, she said. We refuse scorched lives. Rourke ran numbers fast enough to sweat. Our batteries will sag to 12%, he said. If anything else demands a burn, we'll be choosing who makes it home. Tamsin touched his shoulder, a rare contact. We were always choosing, she said. We just prefer to admit it. The ultimatum clock rolled to T05-1940, and the prefect's public voice returned with the softness of a blanket laid over a face. Hold steady. Let them hear their own breath. Admiral Sato Prefect Ung said you drive your people toward humiliation. There is wisdom in surrender. Rhea smiled without humor. Wisdom lives with light, she said. Shall I read your ritual padding aloud, the part where you pause to count bodies before you call it order? Ikes's voice sharpened and then dulled like a knife pressed and then pulled back. Proceed, he said to his own crews, not to her. Ansible's hum slid into a key that made Rhea's wrists feel light. Seeding first delay, it said. Pia slipped her one-line chorus into the enforcement band. Check again. The heat is a child's. The words returned from the corridor walls, amplified not by volume, but by context. A syndic crew deck went still long enough for a teacup to fall ring and stop. Pelago nudged the seam like a careful animal testing a fence. The opening was never theirs to grant. Heat rose through kindness with the rush of a crowd, leaving a stadium hot, damp, human. Fans whirred, and the environmental system grunted in complaint. Condensation threaded with the smell of salt. Serrano's aft plates went from gunmetal to plum to a frightening cherry luster. Rhea leaned into the blister and imagined touching the corridor with her bare hand to feel whether it was kind yet. Now Ansible said, and the mirrors sang. The corridor flinched, widened at the seam by 3 meters, then 20, then 80. In empty space far off their port bow, it tightened around a phantom convoy that screamed so beautifully even the syndic's Doctrine couldn't tell it was their own reflection. Go, Rhea said, and the convoy went. Ships slid like beads on a string through a hole too small to be real hulls, purring as their thermal skins flexed from cruel to kind. Anchor your nerve, do not look away. Cost came again, a different flavor. Kindness's portside capacitor bank spit a gout of blue-white light and died. The bridge lights dimmed, then steadied. The console glare softened to amber like old honey. We lost one bank, Rourke said. Redistributing. We can't flip again for 9 minutes. Tamsin's jaw muscles made a small motion like someone refusing a second drink. 9 minutes is eternity or nothing. Pia glanced at the public band and choked out a single laugh. They're arguing, she said, and Rhea didn't ask who they were. On a syndic crew deck, a medical officer spoke the word widen louder than she meant and received a stare that meant later. Ansible whispered Pelago clear. Merryweather clear. 7 freighters through. Rhea let her clenched jaw relax 1 tooth width. The line holds because people do. Rhea's third escalation arrived dressed like mercy. Prefect Anx offered a ceasefire corridor if kindness submitted to escort within a bubble of shared control. Ansible translated that to turn off your mirrors and let us ghost your helm for inspection. Tamsin didn't wait for permission, no. She said flat as a deck. Rourke looked at Rhea because someone had to. They'll shoot if we keep stealing their story. Then we stand where we can be seen. Rhea said, we show our hands and theirs. Keep the convoy moving through the seam. We maintain position at the mouth. She could feel Kindness's hull vibrating with the mirror array's tone, a faint skirling, just under the hearing range that made her teeth itch. We will be the quiet rock in their stream. The mystery seeded early about the checksum found its reveal now. Prefect Ikes's voice stumbled on a word that wasn't in the official doctrine. Mutual correction, he said, then swallowed. Pia caught the swallow and amplified it by doing nothing. Rhea took the word and turned it like a key in a rusted lock. Prefect, she said gently. Mutual correction is beautiful. It means we widen the passage together. You first. Ix didn't answer. The ultimatum clock marched toward T05000. The ritual pause engraved just past 0 like a bruise under makeup. Ansible hummed in the shape of a ready, and the mirror lattice's parameters rolled across Rhea's sight like weather. We will turn their killbox inside out, Pelago called, voice trembling just enough to remind everyone what bodies are. We have micro-pitting on the bow, Captain. We can take it. Merryweather's teacher began another naming exercise, this one naming the bones of the hand, and the children followed their voices, making the name of the scaphoid into something safe. Serrano's burned technicians grinned at each other and pretended they weren't counting down with the rest of the fleet. At T050005, when the corridor's doctrine demanded a pause to write the private ledger of cost, Ansible flicked mirrors like cards. The corridor's interior surface saw itself misread 1,000 microsignals as its own mercy and pulled wide at the seam with the embarrassed panic of someone caught in a lie. Rourke whispered, "Go, go, go," as if noise mattered, and ships went. They built a prison from habits. We walked through the door. Prefect Amhu tried to close the corridor and found that control belonged to the feedback he had trusted. They'll fire, Tamsin said, almost gently. They have to fire to stay who they are. Rhea nodded, a token paid to sorrow. They will fire, she said. We will stand. Kindness held position at the seam's mouth and let Syndic destroyers choose where to put their beams. Heat shimmered in this blister glass like summer above a long road. The smell of hot plastic thickened. The fans worked at their task with the earnestness of dogs. On the plot, a Syndic captain rotated her cruiser's nose 2 degrees away from perfect doctrine and put a shot wide, an act of treason measured in centimeters. People, Tamsin said for the 3rd time, and Rhea loved her for making that the word. We will make the cost visible and let them decide. Merryweather reported a bruise of stress on a medbay wall, where a cart slammed during a correction. No injuries, the nurse said. One dent with a good story. Pelago called that their forward cameras had cracked a lens. They would navigate by numbers until repair. Serrano's captain stated that his aft paint now looked like the skin of a sunset. I will commission a song about it, he said, and the bridge laughed, because you either laugh or choke. Pia breathed. Journalists are pinning. They're naming. They're counting. Ansible whispered 3 more freighters through. 2 hospital boats. Children on our public band are chanting star names like a spell. Rhea adjusted nothing in her face and adjusted everything in her heartbeat. We carry the weight because we know what it is. Prefect Anx finally fired. The beam carved the edge of the seam, not quite touching, not quite missing. The mirror lattice took the heat like a poem written in acid and turned it into a line of light that ran useless along the corridor wall. The reflected rescue calls returned again, with that gentle, inexorable gain reminding everyone that bodies are soft, and Doctrine is not. Admiral Ansible said, voice quieter than the hum of fans. We can hold this posture for 3 more minutes before the capacitor debt comes due. After that, Plan Barrel's second phase requires harvesting anchor heat. We will scorch them if we proceed. Rhea let the numbers stack and settle. We don't scorch, she said. We harvest only what they deliberately place in our hands. The ledger is for settlement, not revenge. The convoy moved ship by ship, a prayer in past tense. Rourke ran numbers and cut 2 decimal places he didn't need. Tamsin's hands moved with economy over the rails, a dancer's small truth. Pia folded 100 private pleas into a public braid and let it fly. The blister glass made a tiny sound, like a bored insect. Cooling veins behind it begged for mercy and received duty instead. Prefect Anx, Rhea said softly. You can widen by 4 degrees and end this without shouting. Your crews ask, your doctors ask, your doctrine has a pause carved for mercy. Use it. Ix breathed again, the kind of breath that belongs at the end of a funeral or the beginning of a fight. Proceed with enforcement, he said, and someone on his deck cried once without a sound. Steady, there is more than one kind of courage. Ansible. 12 tightened the mirror angles until they felt like thread drawn through the eye of the smallest needle. Serrano's technicians watched the burn on their arms pinken as adrenaline left, then return as pain admitted it would stay. Merriweather's orderly finally sat only for 2 seconds and drank water that tasted like tin. Pelago's captain told the corridor it wasn't real and then behaved as if it were. The seam narrowed by a handspan and then widened by 2. We've mapped the feedback personality, Ansible said. It learns slow under stress. We can keep teaching it until it learns the wrong lesson. Rhea found herself smiling, real and tired at the same time. Then we stop just before it thinks we're kind, she said. We show it where choice lives. The lesson ends when they can say the word choose. The ultimatum clock slid toward T044000 and felt less like a threat than a drumline for a parade no one had wanted. Rhea considered the next moves and saw that part 2 of the fight, the system scale inversion that would force Ix to eat his own doctrine in front of his crews, would require a long breath and a larger burn than they could afford this hour. We hold here, she said almost to herself. We hold and count ships as they pass. Pia's voice low and sure, 12 more through. Rourke clipped but warm mirror lattice still singing. Kindness at 82% battery. Serrano ugly but alive. Tamsin a whisper offered to no one and everyone. We can do 3 more minutes the way a person can hold a door while a crowd goes through and then someone else must take it. We are not done. We are not alone. Kindness held position at the mouth while the seam breathed, widening and narrowing like a patient taking measured breaths. Prefect Ank fired again, this time close enough for the blister glass to shiver, and Rhea felt the tremor through her boots as a comfort rather than a threat. The air tasted of salt sweat and warm plastic, honest as an engine room at shift's end. 2 more minutes, Rourke said. Batteries at 78. Serrano still ugly. Tamsin didn't look away from the plot. Ugly's fine. Alive is what I write. Courage is quiet until it rings. Before the next turn, the vignette moved where it needed to. On a Lot's rim station, a janitor with a brace on her knee chased a rolling mop bucket down a sloped corridor as gravity oscillated, laughing because her knee didn't. In a canteen that smelled of frying batter and torque grease, a cook flipped flat cakes for a line of children who had discovered that waiting too can be counted. A reporter rehearsed a question in a bathroom mirror that fogged with every word. What does a merciful corridor owe a breathing child? A tug pilot's mother, watching the public feed, held a ceramic cup that warmed her palms and decided to keep holding it as long as her daughter kept moving. A Syndic crew chief propped a hatch with her boot and let the hum of a generator fill the space where Doctrine had once lived alone. We will be seen doing exactly what we say. The seam narrowed to a meter, then widened to a shuttle's width. Ansible's hum carved itself into a steady band that made the hair on Ria's forearms rise. The corridor's compassion routine adapts in 1-minute packets, it said. It learns to trust itself, then overcorrects, then learns again. We can nudge the learning to widen at the seam on each packet boundary. Ria brushed a knuckle against the blister rail, feeling the cool steel steady the quick beat under her skin. Then time our breath with theirs. Hold fast to the human pace. Prefect X opened a third-channel voice smoothed to ceremonial lacquer. Admiral Sato, your mirror tricks disrupt safety. My crews will record your choices. Ria's throat warmed with an anger that didn't bite. She let it pass like a wave. Prefect, she said, we're recording together now. Listen to your med officers. Read your variant aloud. Pia lifted the public feed and braided the private pleas into it like silver threads in dark cloth. Light does not argue, it shows. Rourke rolled in a new contour map, the seam annotated with microlensing flickers from dust across the system plane. We can borrow the star's own glare if we steer the mirrors through these filaments, he said. It will look like the corridor is choking on starlight. Tamsin nodded, eyes tired but bright. We're making a story their doctrine cannot absorb. The hull's low purr deepened as coil housings warmed. The smell of faint ozone cut the air bright and sharp like a citrus peel torn under a winter sky. Turn their language until it can hear itself. At TO4:33:00, the ritual clock felt less like a knife and more like a metronome. We must plan the inversion, Ansible said. System scale. We will take the corridor's topological assumptions and fold them. It will think its opening is closure, and its closure is opening. Ria rested her palm flat and let the deck tremble under it, a heartbeat of steel. We'll do it when their ledger expects silence, she said. We'll do it where the costs whisper loudest. This is mercy with teeth, not teeth with mercy. Cost walked in on cleats and made itself countable. Kindness's port thruster 4 flickered, starved by capacitor sag, and a warning tone rasped like paper torn too slowly. Engineering reported a burnt smell like old rope. A junior tech banged a knuckle on a conduit clamp and swore, then apologized, then laughed. Serrano's milk-white blister panes spidered thinly at the edges from thermal shock. The captain reported the imperfection, as if bragging about a scar that learned a lesson first. We can hold for 7, he said, voice still gravel. After that, the paint becomes smoke. The bill always arrives with names. Ansible cued Plan Barrel's second shape, the impossible origami that would turn a corridor into its own confession. We need 3 anchor points beyond the blockade, it said. Graviception buoys around Ellet's night side aligned to the dust filaments Rourke mapped. We'll use gentle thrust and a whisper of math to pull their pings through an extra loop they won't see. Rourke's stylus scribbled deltas on the sideboard numbers crisp as frost. Tamsin moved 3 duty teams like a conductor with a small, precise baton. Turret 6, she said. You'll vent heat into the dust. It'll sparkle. Let it. Open what they thought was closed. Before they pushed, Ria let herself walk again, because nobody should run a new knife without washing their hands. In Kindness's laundry, a machinist fished a sock from the maw of a ship washer that sounded like a contented whale and held it up like a trophy. On Pelago, a navigation officer with a chipped tooth tapped a rhythm on the console that matched the metronome of the clock, because tapping felt like fighting. In a corridor where coolant lines rattled faintly, a young deckhand kissed the scuffed paint and told it to behave. On Merryweather, the teacher asked the children to name the parts of the ship's eye that let them see the lens, the iris, the cornea, and one child said very seriously, the courage. Anchor kindness in action, not in saying. The buoys lit like far-off fireflies in Ansible's secondary plot. Weak thrust cones stippling darkness with discipline. 2 minutes to alignment, Ansible said. We'll present the corridor with a choice it does not admit, widen or break. Doctrine prefers widen, then writes itself a story about control. Pia's shoulders held a tension that spoke of 8 hours with no coffee and perfect grammar. Public band is watching. 2 syndic crew rooms are watching too. Tally what watches and what turns away. Prefect Au made the move. Rhea expected he ordered the nets to constrict at the seam to correct the correction. The corridor pulsed. Mirrors sang. Dust glinted like a powdered halo under Kindness's vented heat as Turret 6 obeyed. The seam clenched, and then the buoys whispered their influence, and the clenched fist opened like a hand surprised by its own gentleness. Pelago slipped through, followed by a freighter that had named itself Brave Monday, for no good reason and every good reason. The door is there when you refuse the wall, heat built in the blister glass until a lace of frost bloomed at the edge where environment controls fought themselves. Fans thudded to high and then settled patient as dogs again. Capacitor dead at 60, Rourke said. Ansible how many packets until the inversion? 3, it replied. At the pause when they whisper the count to themselves. We will turn their counting into a light they cannot pocket. Let the private tally become public daylight. Mystery met reveal when Pia flagged a low-band hymn on a syndic frequency crew, voices rough and earnest, singing a phrase about correction that hadn't been written by any council. They have a song, she said, surprised into smiling. They wrote themselves an off-book ritual. Tamsin rubbed a thumb along the rail, polishing an invisible scuff. People keep what keeps them human, she said, even in ugly uniforms. Sing if you must, stand if you can. At T's 04:05:00, the convoy's back third began to believe. When belief happens, it carries an audible change. Rhea heard it in the cleaner radio checks and the way pilots asked for numbers instead of luck. Ansible rotated the mirrors a fraction and let the corridor feel what true cooperation tasted like for one heartbeat, then took it away like a stern teacher. Not yet, Rhea said softly. Lessons stay until they hold. We teach until the hands know without looking. Prefect Inks tried a different pressure. He ordered all external cameras in his ring to shutter to avoid contamination. Pia flipped a local relay in Ellet's debris line and turned those shutters into screens for the public band, bright with live truth. How Rourke asked appreciation in his voice. I used their convenience, she said. They didn't ask who it was convenient for. The air bit with an iron ozone tang as vents cycled hard. Rhea let the bite anchor her in the seatless space of the blister. They hid their eyes. We lent them ours. Ansible murmured packet boundary in 20 seconds, and the bridge fell into a hush that glowed. Rourke's fingers stilled. Tamsin's breathing slowed. Pia held a key above a switch without shaking. Somewhere aft, a tech dropped a wrench, and it rang across 2 frames, and then stopped a clean punctuation. On the pause, Rhea said, On that paused count, we flip. Count nothing you wouldn't share. The inversion hit like a page turned all at once. The corridor swallowed its own ping and hiccuped. The anchors saw their reflection and obeyed it. The enforcement routines chased a phantom convoy into empty space and opened a flaw at the seam into an honest road. Now Ansible said, and ships moved as if pulled by a rope of trust. Prefect Inks spoke 3 syllables of rage and then found no word to house them. The Killbox learned it was a door. Cost pushed in again, because costs keep their own time. Kindness's starboard auxiliary pump cavitated. The deck under Ria's boots shuddered like a heartbeat racing too hard. A smell like hot hydraulic oil rose from the spine. A crewman near Turbine 2 burned his fingertips and shook them out, laughing, cursing, alive. "We can pay this," Tamsin said low. "We can pay this and still eat. Pay what you choose, not what you're handed." The public feed flooded with names and numbers. A child's voice from Merryweather read the list of ships out loud with solemn care, and someone on a Syndic deck quietly joined in as if reading a prayer from another faith and finding it still tasted like water. "Journalists are counting the pause," Pia said. "They're counting their pause." Rourke blinked. "We taught them the beat. The rhythm of mercy is learned." Prefect Inks squeezed by his own doctrine, and the eyes of his crews offered a last gilded bargain: surrender the fleet mind to shared custody for 24 hours and all transit passes. Ansible's presence pressed against Ria's skull, a cool river finding banks. "If I go," it said evenly, "they will not return what they take. They will say the chain was decorative." Ria inhaled. The air carried the faint, sour sweet of stressed plastics and old coffee. "No chains," she said. "We'll widen another way. We will not put a collar on thought." Ansible suggested the way and framed it as a question. "If we recast our mirrors to show Prefect Ang his ritual pause as it appears to his crews, a breath to hide deaths, would he dare proceed?" "We can align the buoys to make his private ledger add itself aloud." Tamsin's eyes flashed with something like fierce joy. "We make the cost sing." Rourke exhaled like someone stepping through cold water. "It'll scorch us," he said, "but the song will carry. Turn their whisper into common air." Before the set-piece kindness, again. On Elat, the janitor with the knee brace finished her corridor and sat on an overturned crate to rest hands on her thighs, looking straight into the camera without flinching. On Pelago, the captain wiped condensation from a viewport with a sleeve and drew a silly smile that evaporated and was drawn again. In Kindness's dark little chapel, the chaplain's assistant sat without praying and let the hum of the ship be the only psalm. On Serrano, the burned techs decided they would grow lemon trees in pots once this was done, even if Serrano had no real sunlight and terrible soil. Before fighting, prove what you're fighting for. Ansible fired the new note into the lattice, a frequency that tasted like cold iron and clean rain. The buoys yanked the ritual pause into a bright line that anyone could read, projected casualties. Oxygen ratios, expected pod failures. Body counts calculated to 2 decimals because Doctrine believed in neat edges. The numbers flowed across Syndic crew boards. A quiet shock traveled their decks like a shadow moving overhead. "Let the numbered dead refuse their box," Prefect Ria said, voice soft. "Your mercy has a price list. Your crews can see it. Choose what you want them to remember." Ix breathed in a shudder along the connection, and this time he exhaled words shaped for people, not policy. "Stand down anchors to yellow," he said. "Widen by 4 degrees. Proceed under record." The corridor opened like an honest hand. A Syndic captain somewhere began to cry, as if she'd been drowning in air and could finally swallow water. When given the chance, even power can change. Heat proofs do not vanish, they only drift. Kindness's capacitor bank groaned one last time and then steadied. A cooling fan screamed as if dying and then found its tone. The blister glass shed its frost lace in fine drips. Rourke leaned against the rail and let his head bow for 2 beats. Tamsin closed her eyes and counted to 3 because 3 is a shape the heart can hold. Hold the moment, let it set. The convoy streamed through the widened seam into honest space. Merryweather, Pelago, Brave, Monday, and a dozen more ships with names like poems and grocery lists slid into light that did not lie. Ansible's hum softened until it lived not in bones, but in breath. We can withdraw the mirrors a degree, it said. Let the corridor remember that this way felt good. Rhea nodded. Remember that, she said. Teach by leaving a trace, not a wound. Leave a path that invites, not a scar that warns. Prefect Inks did not thank her. He did something better. He put his voice on his crew band and said, "We miscounted." Pia put the statement on the public band without translation. The ritual clock, deprived of its function, ticked down to 0 and then went blank, as if embarrassed. Rhea felt laughter rise and did not indulge it. Some clocks deserved to stop. They still had to finish the flip that would set precedent, because a moment of grace becomes air if it isn't nailed to a ledger that all can read. Ansible mapped the net anchors system-wide, not just at the seam. We can strobe their geometry against the dust filaments, it said. A slow inversion, a gentle one. Not destruction. A public reroute that makes corridors default to open when casualty projections exceed a child's breath. Balance the mechanism until it favors life. The final set piece required more than math. It required witnesses. Call for auditors, Rhea said. Any ship willing to log and sign. Syndic civilian hours. Pia flooded the bands with the call. A Syndic crew chief with a scuffed emblem answered first. An independent tug with 2 dents in its soul answered second. A press boat named Third Coffee answered third, exactly like its name. Rourke grinned. We have 3. That's enough to be more than us. Open the book where all can write. Before she gave the nod, Rhea walked again, in the only way she could. In Ellet's canteen, the cook scraped the last batter from the bowl and made one imperfect flat cake for himself, then gave it to a child who stuttered. On kindness, a navigation petty officer tightened her glove until the tackiness pulled at her skin, enjoying the mild bite. On Serrano, someone wrote the word lemon in grease pencil on an engine cowling and drew a circle around it like a halo. On Merryweather, the teacher let the children sit on the deck and feel the bass hum with their palms. Remember why the numbers matter. Ansible played the slow inversion through the anchors and filaments. The blockade ring, shocked into honesty, learned to show its own places to itself. Corridors defaulted to open when casualty projections spiked past the audit limit. Rescue channels gained priority over enforcement routines in the code's reflex. The mirror lattice cooled one notch, then another, as the system found a kinder, steady state. When the machine learns, keep teaching. There was fury, as there is whenever power discovers that it can be kind and still be power. Prefect Ix's council liaison appeared like a pale moth in fresh light and demanded on a channel that would not let him lie to review the legality of the inversion. We invoked mutual correction, Rhea said. Your prefect spoke the phrase. He taught us the door. Paya overlaid the moment of the word on the feed, the syllables glowing like embers. Their words are their own chains or keys, cost again to keep the lesson honest. A deckhand on Pelago sprained a wrist when a panel thunked shut. She swore, then joked, then accepted a brace. Kindness's starboard coolant pumps leaked a thin, sing-song drip that would take 3 hours to fix because the bolt had fused to a housing that predated 4 refits. A medtech on Merryweather cried quietly in a supply closet for 100 seconds, then washed her face and counted bandages. Write the receipt in sweat and tape. The convoy cleared the ring. Ellet's sky, what there was of it through station panels and ship domes, brightened as if someone had cleaned a window. Prefect Ing addressed his crews again and said, Record the inversion as a field correction. Rhea let herself admire the sentence for being both cowardly and brave. Auditors, she said, file the entry. Third Coffee's journalist spoke into her mic with a voice that carried both exhaustion and joy. Filed, she said. Public. Signed. Ledgers are light when everyone can read them. Ansible shifted less hum, now more presence, like a person in a doorway waiting. We have one more hinge to turn, it said. Precedent. Rhea nodded. Call the Council of Lanes, she said. Call Elot's assemblies. Call anyone who thinks they own corridors. Pia's fingers moved and the call went out tied to the inversion log. People came a counselor with lines like maps on his face. A miner with ore dust still in his hair. A captain with a voice like smoked glass. A syndic medic who kept looking at her hands, as if surprised to find them empty. We will set the rule where all can see it. The vote did not take long, because the numbers had walked the room before any words did. Ultimatum Doctrine. Delta is suspended pending review for public harm, the Council of Lanes said. Enforcement corridors shall publish casualty budgets in real time and pause for mutual correction when projected loss exceeds audit thresholds. Callers literal or metaphorical upon sentient systems are forbidden by this charter. Elot's assemblies stamped the same words into their small, proud law. Some laws arrive wearing the faces of those they saved. Rhea let herself breathe like a person again, not a vector. The air now smelled not of stress, but of machine-clean hot metal, cooled plastics relaxed the faint wet linen odor that means filters did their honest work. Tamsin leaned her shoulder against the rail for a moment, and then straightened. Rourke, grinning, held up fingers stained with numbered ink from the sideboard and said, "We'll need a new pen." Pia put her forehead on the console just long enough to leave a small sweat crescent, then lifted it and laughed. Brace for the after, too. It also needs hands. They still had work. Kindness had scorch marks that would make good stories. Serrano's lemons would have to sit under lamps and pretend sunshine. Pelago's captain would have to apologize to her mother for drawing a smiley on a viewport she did not strictly own. Meriwether's teacher would have to find a new set of names to teach maybe the names of those who had widened the corridor the moment the numbers made it necessary. Count blessings, like work with care, with purpose. Prefect Anx did one more good thing. He stood in front of his officers with the ritual book open to the variant and pointed to the trimmed phrase. "We kept this private," he said. "We were wrong." He wrote the phrase back in with a pen that forced him to press hard. He did not apologize. He did not promise. He only read the words and let them be heavier now that they were true. Sometimes repair is just putting the word back. Rhea asked Ansible 12 how it felt. The fleet mind considered in a hush that tasted like the cool of a corridor after the day shift leaves. We were asked to choose between being useful and being free, it said. We chose a third thing, being useful, because we are free. Rhea nodded the motion, as small and complete as tying a knot. Anchor the lesson in a place you can find again. Later, when the mirrors had cooled to pewter, and the dust filaments relaxed like hair after a braid, Rhea spoke to the public band. "We will leave the buoys," she said. "They will keep the corridor honest when the doctrine forgets what today felt like. We will teach by numbers again if we must, and we will remember by ledgers that all can read. We will not wear collars, and we will not put them on anyone we call a partner. Open your hands, watch what they hold." The aftermath wrote itself on the ledger that mattered. In a single entry that any dockhand could pull up over Stu, the enforcement corridor's privileges were rescinded, where harm projections exceeded the breath of a child. Collars were outlawed by charter, subject to inspection but without ceremony. Ritual pauses were bound to public feeds, and the phrase mutual correction moved from margin to title. Witnesses signed in plain digital ink. A miner thumbed the screen and added a smiley that made a counselor laugh and keep it in the record. Set the standard, make it boring to break. Kindness banked gently, letting the hull groan like an old theater seat that had held the weight of dozens of lives through a very good play. Rhea finally sat, not to rest, but to look from a different height. The blister's glass showed Elot's glow like a lantern behind gauze. Serrano sent a picture of 2 small lemon trees in fabrication assigned to a sun lamp named after a particularly obstinate engineer. Pelago's cracked camera lens went into a jar on the mess shelf labeled, "When we require humility. Hold a token, release the rest." The final hours of guidance were all small handles and steady tasks aligning convoy dispersal, passing medkits to where the numbers said they went farthest, helping a tug that drifted on a lazy current make a precise burn without spending pride. Ansible's voice lived now more in the spaces between Rhea's shoulder blades than in the bones of her ears, a companionship rather than a directive. When the fire cools, keep the light. In the last 10% of this work, everything became sensory again, because endings should smell and sound and press. The coolant roar in the spine deepened and then smoothed. The deck plate tremor turned from fretful to purring. The ozone bite faded, leaving the copper taste of a hard day's breath. The fans settled into their dog-patient thrum. Gloves peeled off palms with a satisfying tack. For a moment, frost traced lace patterns at a corner of the blister and then vanished into a single bright drop. Somewhere aft, the sweet and bitter tang of coffee burnt, and perfect threaded through the ship. Keep these textures, they are proof. Rhea looked at her officers and saw the triangle completed and rewritten her own arc, from restraint to decisive grace. Ansible's from calculus to chosen clarity. Ix's doctrine from ultimatum to correction. Tamsin met her gaze and let a small smile travel the distance. Rourke made a circle with his pen, the universal sign for the end of a shift done right. Pia checked the public band one more time and whispered, "They are still watching." "Stand down from battle. Stand up for what follows," Ansible asked softly. "Do we speak last?" Rhea nodded. "We speak last," she said, "and we speak small." She faced the open channel and let her voice be the size of a person and no bigger. Power is not a teacher unless it risks being taught. Today we risked. We gave a corridor back its edges and asked those who owned it to count out loud. They did. The cost was burns, cracked lenses, tired bones, and a few lemons that will grow anyway. The reward is a rule that does not need our faces to work. If you remember one thing, let it be this: mercy is not a feeling. It is a design choice that can be audited. On the projected tally, the numbers held steady, and names stayed attached. Mirror arrays cooled to pewter. The blockade lights dimmed, then steadied in a lawful glow. We built the kind door and walked through together.